Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal. Today's August 10th, and below you can follow the link to the story of the young woman who was pink alert responsive and dead at the same time. This is how an abortion clinic charted a dead patient. And I'm going to go back to the Kermit Gosnell grand jury report to read about how dirty the place was. And I've said it before, Gosnell was a difference in degree, not type. And I'll provide some links below to filthy abortion clinics. In fact, I'll just include a playlist. Okay? So, the Women's Medical Society was filthy and totally unsuitable as a medical office or a surgical facility. The grand jury toured the facility at 3801 Lancaster Avenue. It is unbelievable to us that the Pennsylvania Department of Health approved this building as an abortion facility. We were stunned to learn that between 1978 and 1993, the department sporadically inspected and approved the clinic, and then never inspected it again until February 2010, when health department employees entered the facility at the request of law enforcement officials who were investigating allegations of the illegal sale of drugs and prescriptions. The physical layout of the clinic, a confusing maze of narrow hallways and multiple twisting stairways, should have been an obvious bar to its use for surgical procedures. The three-story structure, created by joining two buildings, had no elevator. Access to the procedure rooms to the outside by wheelchair or stretcher was impossible, as was evident the night Karnamaya Mongar died. According to former staff members, the facility had been substantially cleaned up by the time the grand jury visited it. Between late February 2010, when the practice was closed, and our tour of the clinic in August, significant efforts had been made to make the facility look and smell cleaner. Despite such efforts, it remained a wretched, filthy space. The walls appeared to be urine splattered. The procedure tables were old, and one had a ripped plastic cover. Suction tubing, which was used for abortion procedures and doubled as the only available suction resource for resuscitation, was corroded. A large, dirty fish tank stood in the waiting room, filled with turtles and fish. The dirt-floored basement was stuffed with patient files, plants, junk, and boxes of undisposed of medical waste. The entire facility smelled foul. And remember, when I'm reading this, a National Abortion Federation inspector had seen this place, had rejected his application, but had not reported him to any authorities, and National Abortion Federation members were still referring patients to him, and he was still starting abortions at a National Abortion Federation facility in Delaware and then finishing them at this facility. So even after a NAF inspector went into this building, NAF did not stop sending patients there, either other people's patients or their own patients. These were the conditions after the facility had been shut down and cleaned. Former employees, including Latasha Lewis and Karima Cross, testified to the abhorrent conditions when the clinic was operating. They described the odor that struck one immediately upon entering, a mix of smells emanating from the cloudy fish tank where the turtles were fed crushed clams and baby formula, from boxes of medical waste that sat around for weeks at a time, leaking blood whenever Gosnell failed to pay the bill to the disposal company. They described blood-spattered floors, blood-stained chairs in which patients waited for and then recovered from abortions. Even the stirrups on the procedure table were often caked with dry blood that was not cleaned off between the procedures. There were cat feces and hair throughout the facility, including in the two procedure rooms. Gosnell, they said, kept two cats at the facility until one died and let them roam freely. The cats not only defecated everywhere, they were infested with fleas. They slept on the beds in the facility when the patients weren't using them. Karima Cross testified about the procedure rooms. The rooms were dirty, blood everywhere, dust everywhere, nothing was clean. The bathrooms, according to Lewis, were cleaned just once a week, despite the fact that patients were vomiting in the sink and delivering babies in the toilets. Medical waste and fetal remains were supposed to be picked up weekly by a licensed disposal provider. Gosnell, however, did not pay his bills in a timely manner, despite having like $250,000 in cash in his daughter's bedroom. Gosnell did not pay his bills in a timely manner, and the disposal provider would not pick up, sometimes for months. In the interim, and as the search team discovered during the February 18th raid, freezers at the clinic were full of discarded fetuses and medical waste was piled up in the basement. And if you follow the link to the grand jury report, you can see some pictures that the police took during the raid. Sometimes, according to Tina Baldwin, fetal remains were left out overnight. You knew about it as soon as, sorry, I'm going to quote from her, you knew about it the next day when you opened the door because you could smell it as soon as you opened the door. According to a plan that Gosnell filed with the Philadelphia Health Department in 2004, waste was to be stored in the basement for a once-a-week pickup by a waste disposal company, but he didn't follow the plan. He failed to pay his bills. Weeks went by without a pickup, and the containers in the basement leaked. And there's a picture of bags and bags and bags of biohazard waste. So that's just the overall filthy conditions. Tune in again and we'll cover, well, no, we'll cover the dirty instruments. We're only 6 minutes into it. The instruments that were inserted into women's bodies were also unsanitary, according to the workers. Karima Cross showed the grand jury a photograph she had taken showing how the instruments were purportedly sterilized. The photo shows a pan on the floor. In it are the doctor's tools, supposedly soaking in a sterilizing solution. But the photo shows that the instruments cannot get clean because they do not fit in the pan and are not submerged. Gosnell would nevertheless pluck instruments from this pan on the floor and use them for procedures. Cross said that she saw Gosnell insert into a woman's vagina a speculum that was still bloody from the previous patient. She testified about how Gosnell would ignore her complaints about his unsanitary practices. And this is a quote from Karima Cross. The instruments were dirty. It was plenty of times that I had complained. It would be a speculum, and he'll use it. I would complain. I'll leave the speculum on his tray so he can see it, so he can say something to whoever is cleaning them. It'll have blood on it. He would still use it. And there was a lot of girls that was complaining about getting infections, trichomonas, chlamydia, because of the instruments not being cleaned. Several workers testified that Gosnell insisted on reusing plastic curettes, the tool used to remove tissue from uteruses, even though they were made for single use only. And again, he's got about $250,000 in cash laying around in his house, but he supposedly could not afford to replace these single-use instruments. Latasha Lewis testified that Gosnell would make his staff reuse the curettes until they broke. Like Cross, Lewis believed it was the unsanitary instruments that were causing patients to become infected with chlamydia and gonorrhea. When inspectors from Pennsylvania's Department of Health and State surveyed the facility in February 2010, after they were kind of forced to, they corroborated much of what former staff members described. Department of Health workers found that the suction source used by the doctor to perform abortions was the only one available to resuscitate patients. They found the tubing attached to the suction source was corroded. They also described the suction source's vacuum meter as covered with a brown substance, making the numbers on the meter barely readable. An oxygen mask and its tubing were covered in a thick gray layer of a substance that appeared to be dust. And again, there's pictures. The inspector from the Department of State reported, the clinic conditions are deplorable and unsanitary. There was blood on the floor and parts of aborted fetuses were displayed in jars.